Today we present a measured, adapted script based on a public address, rewritten in a neutral and explanatory voice to help viewers follow what was said and why it matters. The speaker opens by addressing compatriots and the Muslim population broadly, a rhetorical move designed to reach both a domestic audience and sympathetic communities beyond national borders. At the core of the remarks is a forceful statement about territorial integrity. The speaker vows that not an inch of the country will be negotiated away, stressing that territorial integrity was non-negotiable and presented as an absolute principle. This central claim, about refusing to cede even an inch of soil, serves as the backbone of the address and anchors the subsequent arguments and historical references. The speech directly confronts circulating reports that negotiations or talks were being used to retake a specific area, and it seeks to dispel those reports with categorical denial. The location named in the original remarks is referenced as strategically and symbolically significant, and the speaker rejects the idea that political engagement has replaced the use of force. Throughout the address, the speaker contrasts two approaches to power and security, one depicted as cowardly reliance on foreign support, and the other presented as autonomous resistance. Those who are accused of bringing foreigners here are characterized as having surrendered sovereignty through alliances, a claim that echoes long-standing grievances in the political discourse of the country. The speech frames such alliances as born from fear, describing previous leaders or factions as timid and as having sought refuge with external powers out of self-interest. By contrast, the speaker emphasizes a narrative of fearlessness and continued resolve, invoking 2 decades of struggle to underline credentials and legitimacy in the eyes of supporters. This reference to a prolonged period of conflict functions both as historical shorthand and as political messaging, reminding listeners of a shared past defined by confrontation with foreign forces. Importantly, the adapted script presented here does not endorse the content of the original remarks, but instead paraphrases and explains them so that viewers can assess statements within a broader context. The rhetoric includes repeated assertions that there is nothing to fear from external actors, and that neither wealth nor coercion will sway the movement from its stated objectives. These lines are designed to reassure an audience that may feel vulnerable or uncertain, reinforcing the idea that resolve and sacrifice have been constant features of the group's identity. Listeners should note the symbolic language used, including metaphors and appeals to honor and sacrifice, which bolster emotional resonance even where concrete policy details remain lacking. At several points, the speaker invokes divine favor or reliance on a higher power, a common rhetorical device intended to sanctify political aims and to strengthen moral claims. The address also contains musical interludes and repeated vocal emphasis that serve to amplify the message and to create a cadence that is memorable to listeners. Those musical moments are not mere ornamentation. They function rhetorically to pace the speech, to give listeners time to absorb the claims, and to heighten the emotional impact. When the speaker denies engaging in secret talks or political bargaining, the statement appears aimed as much at domestic rivals as at external audiences who may be watching closely. The denunciation of past leaders who cooperated with foreigners is a familiar motif in regional politics and taps into widespread sentiments about sovereignty and national dignity. For viewers unfamiliar with the specific historical background, the reference to 2 decades of conflict points to a long period of international intervention, local resistance, and changing alliances. The adapted script clarifies that such references are often shorthand for a highly complex history that involves many actors, shifting objectives, and a wide range of civilian experiences. It is important to separate emotive language from verifiable facts. While the speech emphasizes certain narratives, independent reporting and historical research are necessary to corroborate specific claims. From a neutral standpoint, the address is as much political theater as it is policy statement. Theatrical rhetoric can be effective at mobilizing supporters, but does not always translate into clear governance plans. The speakers claim that they fear no one and that they have proven their resolve is an assertion of political legitimacy that seeks to frame the movement as self-sufficient and morally justified. However, for analysts and for the general public, declarations of intent should be evaluated alongside actions, practical governance capacity, and the impact on civilian life. Audiences should consider how such rhetoric might affect negotiations, humanitarian access, and regional stability, since uncompromising positions can both deter and escalate tensions. The address also raises questions about accountability and the mechanisms by which leaders intend to protect rights, provide services, and manage security while maintaining a hardline posture. In regions affected by prolonged conflict, repeated vows of resistance can translate into renewed cycles of violence if they do not accompany concrete commitments to civilian protections. The speech's emphasis on dignity and independence may resonate with populations wary of foreign interference, yet it is important to examine how these themes will be operationalized in day-to-day governance. For journalists, researchers, and viewers, the priority is to cross-check claims, seek multiple sources, and consult independent observers to construct a clearer picture of intentions versus capabilities. International actors watching such statements will assess whether rhetoric signals continuity of past approaches or a recalibration of strategy, and they will respond accordingly in diplomatic channels. The adapted script also points out that language accusing rivals of cowardice or betrayal can deepen domestic polarization and make compromise more difficult, even when compromise may be necessary. Rhetorical framing that paints opponents as collaborators with foreign powers can delegitimize them in the eyes of constituents and reduce the space for inclusive politics. It is also necessary to consider the humanitarian implications. When political actors declare their unwillingness to negotiate over territory, populations living in contested areas may face heightened insecurity. Civilians caught between competing claims often experience displacement, restricted access to services, and exposure to violence. These humanitarian outcomes should be foregrounded whenever political rhetoric intensifies. The adapted script urges viewers to keep humanitarian concerns central when interpreting political statements and to ask what protections will be offered to affected communities. Another important angle is the regional dimension. Statements about rejecting foreign influence can reshape relationships with neighboring countries and international partners. Neighbors may interpret uncompromising rhetoric as a signal to harden their own posture, to engage in preventive diplomacy, or to reassess security cooperation depending on perceived threats. The speech's repeated references to historical struggle are a reminder that narratives of past resistance are often mobilized in present politics to cement identity and justify current strategies. Such narratives can be powerful motivators, but they can also close off alternative pathways that require flexibility, negotiation, and recognition of plural interests within society. In adapting the original transcript, we aim to preserve the factual content while avoiding amplification of inflammatory language or unverified claims, because responsible reporting requires careful translation of intent into context. The speaker's choice to emphasize moral certainty and historical rectitude shapes how the address will be received by different audiences. Supporters may find comfort, while critics may see it as deflection from practical responsibilities. Observers should be alert to how language about not negotiating and about proving courage might translate into policy choices that affect elections, rights, and security arrangements. It is also worth noting the role of media and social networks in circulating such addresses. Amplification can magnify their impact, for better or worse, and can influence public opinion rapidly. Therefore, media literacy remains essential. Audiences should check original sources, compare independent reporting, and be cautious about messages that simplify complex realities into binary moral claims. The adapted script concludes by reminding viewers that a single speech is one piece of a larger puzzle. Understanding true intentions requires watching subsequent actions, policy decisions, and the responses of other key actors. Finally, for anyone trying to draw practical conclusions from the address, the key recommended approach is to seek diverse perspectives, prioritize verified information, and remain attentive to the humanitarian consequences of political posturing. In short, the address asserts an uncompromising commitment to territorial sovereignty, frames prior cooperation with foreigners as a betrayal, and emphasizes a history of resistance as the basis for legitimacy, these claims should be scrutinized, contextualized, and evaluated against independent evidence and the real-world effects on civilians and regional stability. This adaptation is intended to clarify rather than to amplify, to inform rather than to persuade, and to provide viewers with a framework to interpret strong political rhetoric with a critical and human lens. As a final note, viewers should remain vigilant about the difference between evocative, mobilizing language and concrete policy roadmaps, and they should demand transparency about how any uncompromising stance will translate into protections for citizens, arrangements for minorities, mechanisms for dispute resolution, and steps to prevent cycles of violence and displacement while urging humanitarian access and independent monitoring across affected areas. Seek multiple sources, prioritize human impact, and hold leaders accountable through peaceful civic means everywhere now.